Tō tātou taku moana e nā he raru kai kahara mai. E anō ko tātou tēnei e kaha nei ki te hoi. E anō e mehi ana me mehi kātira ki a tātou katoa. Ko rangi awatia ko mahi ngā rangi kia puata ki awatia ki a marama ko papa takua roa ko whakamāku nei te matu o hauraki ki a takua nei takua roa takua he nui takua. Te rangi e tūhenga aru mō wai ko te papa e takotoa hei tūranga waiwai. Ko kare aro ko tamaro ko hine ngaro whāngaingia, whakamarongia, whakapua waiwai. Kia hauraki ai oroto, owaho, oki, o waiua, kia taurikura, kia haukura, kia taua i ka hauraki tana turi whakahaukura, kia tūnga, au me hui e tāe. E mihana kia pōrua, e hara tēnei i te pōwhiri, te whakatau i a pōrua no pōrua anua, te whenua, te hau kaimane, te tangata whenua, hara mai uru mai ki roto i tēnei, kia nohotahi ai, whakaaratahi ai me pēnei te whakapa. Pea noi e mihi anō kia tātou rātou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā rātou.
Tēnā tātou te wā, kia tūna ngā ni whakawhetai, ki te rawa, i ngā tāwhito, i ngā atua, nō reira tēnā whātau, tēnā koe te whakāhu o tō tātou tāma, te moana, tēnā koe. Puridoa, hei po tēnā koe ki tipi kia koutou, kia tātou, nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koe te kura mātua, Sandra, kia koe te rana nō reira, tēnā tātou koutou.
Ina mana ina reo tēnā koutou katoa. And it's wonderful for us to be gathered here today in our first real, what we hope will be a good beginning to our co-governance relationships with the Harakiri Iwi Collective. So I'm so thrilled to have you here, Paul, as, well, I'm not quite sure who's the co-chair, David or Paul? I've got him too.
No one wants to be the boss, get knocked off first.
I'm thrilled to be part of the beginning of this process, and that's what this is about today. It's just kicking that off, and we're just so privileged to be able to be here in this place and in this country and doing what we do. And so I'm looking forward to seeing how this evolves over time. This is a contract we've already entered into, so we're a little bit late in getting the co-governance part off the ground, but never too late, never too late. So welcome everyone and thank you so much. I look forward to being guided by you as we go through this process because we'll need that guidance. As I said to a group of people at a meeting recently that we're running a bit late, 180 years probably too late. But I'm sure that you'll guide us to enable us to make small steps to catching up. So, nō reira tēnā koutou katoa.
Tēnā no. So I just want to acknowledge what Millie has said, and certainly for Hauraki, this is a big move. If we think back, our respective histories, we've come a long way. And this shows real leadership and a progressive approach in terms of the aspirations of our people to work hand in hand with our partners. And as we know, the long history with the councils and legacy organisations going back to the borough and the counties, etc., and also for our people. So we acknowledge your leadership, Sandra, and also all the councillors and full council. As we see around the country, there are different approaches that different councils take, and there are different communities out there, and this, as I say, is a big move. Also acknowledging the trade negotiations, the many years that we've been doing that, and acknowledge David as well as chair of the Government Trust Board. And so we know these are baby steps going forward, but again, to acknowledge this council being a strong supporter during the negotiations of the Crown over the co-governance for the rivers, the Coromandel Peninsula, the Plains, and also the other parts of our Aotearoa. Again, those are brave moves and reflect the relationships that we want to have and bring ourselves closer together. We have large aspirations and recognising the 12 iwi of Hauraki, both in our respective settlements and our collective settlements, to be important partners along with the people of Thames-Coromandel and the council of the district, and bring together what our settlements will provide for. And so that's investment in infrastructure, investment in our communities, and that's both hard and soft in terms of our people, education, and bringing together our respective visions and goals for the future. And if you've seen elsewhere around the country, the results of settlements have been very important catalysts for the regions. And again, this council and other councils in our wiki have been strong supporters of that and want to acknowledge that. So finally, just to say, these are early steps. It's a bit of a brave exploration as to where we're going. That guidance is a two-way street, of course, and we want to do that. Just to note also that our full complement is not here yet. These are incredibly busy times at the moment on different fronts, and so that's the right thing to call that in the placeholders. But we're here to occupy seats while our relations work out where we're going to sit at these respective tables. So just to acknowledge, we're sitting here for the moment as representatives for Untitled and Unedited. As you know, and council is very strong on this. You have your respective relationships with all the iwi, the respective municipality of all of us. That's important, area by area, and also where it arises the collective relationships we have to build. So, speaking probably a bit too long for me, but just wanted to make those acknowledgements and again acknowledge to look at with David in terms of the respective roles that he has.
Yeah. You can take as long as you like. The reason being that this is an important day today and that the agenda is not overly heavy. This is live. I just wanted to remind everybody that this is a live meeting. But this is setting the scene, and so it's really important that everybody says whatever needs to be said. And I'd just like to acknowledge Frank and thank you, Frank, for your opening remarks. And is it? Yeah, sure.
Me kia ora te tēnei wā. Kia koe Frank, e whakatūpera nei mo te karaki tēnei ai kia koe pō tuatana. Kānui tūni kia koe tēnei wā. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou koutou. Kia koe Rob. I can see when we're coming, so pleased you're here. Look, it is a pleasure to be here and continue to work along the vein we've been working with recent times in terms of more collaboration and the opportunities we have together to make Thames-Coromandel District Council a great place to be. So again, along with Paul, we are chairs of respective entities, but in the ultimate future we'll be one group, and that will be the leadership of where we go forward. But at the moment we're in this transition of that settlements and existing structure. So rather than have two lots, we work together. Paul and I worked together for many years, and we just want to set the tone that way and ensure that people who do come to the tables for co-governance are the right people to be able to make the decisions in order to go forward. So again, a great start, and appreciate the opportunity to be here and all the work you've been doing in the past to get to this point. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I just want to add one more thing. We've been working together as a group along the lines of the Coromandel Waiapiako catchment group, and so we've got the Hauraki District Council, Matapiako District Council, Thames-Coromandel District Council, and the Hauraki Collective all working together as a team. And it's been, the meetings we've had so far have been incredibly successful and collaborative and have started to make a difference for the wider region of the Tainui Waka. And so I love the phrase Te Tāra Utawhai, which is the barb of the stingray. You'll see that here in the chamber in the many graphics and pictures of John Revell. So we were very privileged and very fortunate to be able to have this wonderful work of John's in this chamber. And my favourite, of course, is this one here behind me. So just wanted to say that before we start. So if we get into the sort of formal meeting proper, I'll just call for apologies. Are there any apologies? There are none. So public forum, no public forum items not on the agenda. Nothing anybody wants to raise, no conflicts of interest. So we'll get straight into the first report, which is 2.1, and that's the Shoreline Management Plan, SMP, project background, policy, scope and governance. Amon, take it away.
Thank you, kia ora koutou. Got a few slides I'll run through. I think it helps us get a feel for what's in the report and opens up a bit of discussion. So starting off, there is some context in terms of this project. We have a coastal policy statement that guides us and requires us to plan for coastal hazards over 100 years. We've done some work as a council in terms of developing a coastal strategy, and significantly we've had events that have opened our eyes to how significant these hazards are. So the 2018 hazard was quite big, with lots of erosion up the coast. So that's led to this project being initiated. It's been going on for about a year now. And so that's just a touch on the background. In terms of how we approach this project, there's MFE guidance in terms of guiding how to work through coastal hazard climate change issues. There's kind of 3 or 4 main things: understanding the hazards, what matters most and what we can do about it. So that's the approach we're taking with this project. You'll see that reflected in some of the slides later on when we talk about community workshops and how we're going to work with the community. As well as having this best practice, it's probably appropriate to introduce Sian, who's just in the screen in the bottom there, representing our consultants.
Hi, Sian.
So Rural Haskoning.
Hi.
Rural Haskoning have been engaged for the duration of this project, and this slide is an example from Wales that just helps us realise that this is a global problem. There's best practices all over the world, and there's these type of projects, issues happening, and having Rural Haskoning as part of the lead consultant is a key to linking into some of those best practices elsewhere as well as in New Zealand. So Sian is on there if there's questions that come up relating to those other projects, and she'll probably be contributing a bit later as well. So where we've got to in terms of the scope, this is largely a project about coastal hazards. So sitting at the bottom, we've got coastal erosion, coastal inundation, tsunami risk and landslides or cliff instability. So that's largely what the project is about. In terms of the boundaries, we're looking at a 100-year event, sea level rise coming up the Waiho River. We've kind of got a boundary there at Kopu Bridge, so that's a kind of natural point. Arguably the coastal hazard goes further, but that's where we've defined it. And it's all about coast, so it's significant. It's not just a stretch of Thames or a local beach in Whirianga, it's the whole coast that this project's about. Also important is what it's not about, and through discussions with Coastal Panel, there's a bit of debate or push and pull about what the project's about, but it's not about water quality. So in terms of managing the catchment to achieve water quality outcomes, that sits outside this project. So it's not so much about that, and it's not so much about kai moana or the food resources of the sea either. So it's not those things. Where it gets a bit grey is the river hazards. It's not managing or defining the river hazards, but it is considering them. They're an influence on this project, but sit outside. And groundwater flooding is slightly outside this project as well, but it is an influence. So it's not specifically that project, but it will influence some of our decisions.
Before you jump off on that, if anybody's got any questions or any queries they want to ask, just jump in and ask them. And I just wanted to point out that why do you say that it's about the whole coastline? It isn't really, because we're not going to do anything about those coastlines where they're publicly inaccessible and nobody lives there and no infrastructure is affected. So it really is largely around where there are assets affected. Martin, did you want to come and sit up at the table? You sure? So do jump in if anybody's got any questions. I thought it was useful the way you said it's not about water quality, catchment management or Kaimawala. It's all about what's going to trigger some action to protect assets or not, as the case may be.
Yes, that's correct. And you'll see in one of the other slides, although it's about areas that we've got specific concerns in, to understand those areas, we need to look at the whole coastline to start with. So we almost exclude some of the areas because there aren't houses, there aren't things that require management, but that's considered at the start. So how do we get from...
Sean, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Only to say that I agree with you, Sandra, in that we're focusing on those areas where the risk is highest in terms of coming up with management strategies, which is typically where there are people and assets. Having said that, our first pass risk assessment has covered the whole of the coastline, every centimetre of the Thames-Coromandel coastline, so that we could determine whether there is risk there. So, and then on that basis, we've excluded some of the locations which are cliffy or no one lives there. There are certain areas where people don't live now, but they might be the target of future development. So it's important that we include those in our assessments so that you, to avoid any planning decisions that would mean locating a new development in a high risk area. Okay,
thank you.
Yeah, so just to support that comment that this is the first pass risk assessment, and some of the areas don't have much going on at all and therefore are excluded, but they have been considered at the start of the project.
Cool.
So this is the tricky bit, I think, how we get from hazards through to adaptation plans. So it's not just about the hazard. Understanding what the hazard and what at risk is a really important first part of the project, and that's a part of the project we're working with Waikato Regional Council on in terms of understanding and peer reviewing the reports. So that's some of the foundation for decision making. But what we also need to do is understand what matters the most to the community. So what from those hazards will be at risk and what we place higher value on. We need to understand the vulnerability, the consequences, and what's acceptable in terms of risk. So some of that will start to lead to triggers. And so the outcome of this project will be a plan that has triggers associated with it. Not necessarily strict timeframes, but you'll have scenarios where if one thing happens, we'll implement this course of action. So working through from hazards to a plan that has the triggers, takes into account what people think is important, understands the risk, is the meat of the project, is where the work happens. Another important thing which we've had a few discussions about and was adopted by council is the governance framework, the governance structure. So we're S7P Shoreline Management Plan Committee of Council here today alongside Pata Hauriki. We've got the technical advisory group in the middle there. We'll be bringing in people like WRC, NZTA, maybe Ministry of Education, others who have an interest in the work we're doing to allow them to participate at the right level. And then really important, we've got coastal panels. So the coastal panels have partially been set up to guide and develop these plans. There's a really strong, important connection to the community, these coastal panels, and we've divided and that's in another slide, but we've got 4 different areas in terms of the coastal panels. So in terms of background, I guess I was going to pause there and allow an opportunity for Sian or anyone else to ask questions or have discussion on that. Perhaps the scope is an interesting area that it's good to understand, but
Anybody got any questions or queries, or we just move on to the next? Paul?
I've got some questions, but probably.
Oh, okay, you're on.
Unedited.
Okay.
so moving on to the next paper, really.
Okay.
So 2.1 Shoreline Management Plan's terms of reference. So this was adopted by council on the 15th, I think, of September. Key things from that terms of reference. There's more detail in front of you, but there'll be a governance, or provide governance oversight to the Shoreline Management Plan project. So that's this committee. It will ensure consistency. It will agree recommendations. It will adopt the plan and community action plans at the end. We'll make recommendations to council. Kind of an important thing in there, not on the screen there, is that it also makes decisions about the project. Not so much where there are larger financial implications, but where there are decisions required. This is the committee that is able to make those decisions. It's jointly chaired by the Mayor and the Chair of Parahodiki. And for a quorum, we need at least two members, so that's pretty good. Nothing else on the terms of reference for me to talk about.
I like the as required, to make quarterly as required, because it's better to have a robust and decent agenda rather than just have a meeting for the sake of having a meeting.
Yep. Probably a slight, you may consider it a discrepancy, but we've actually got 4, I think, meetings booked. It's better to book them and then cancel them than only have 2.
Okay. As long as we can cancel them reasonably in advance, so that it doesn't, because people have responsibilities they need to deal with. So. Any questions from anybody? Comments? No?
So the last paper really is about the progress and the project program. Only a few slides here. We've touched on it already, but we've completed first pass risk assessment. So a couple of areas stand out, and there's been a bit of discussion about this in council, but the Thames and Thames Coast area, probably the highest kind of risk hazard areas, followed very closely by Whitianga. There are other areas, but those 2 did stand out on the first pass risk assessment.
The great thing about the Thames Coast one is it's largely a state highway. So I'm delighted about that. The obvious vulnerabilities on the 2, 3, 4 beaches and on the different points along that Thames Coast Highway.
Yes, and I think that's a nice lead into the values and objectives, I suppose. There's been some discussion on that, and last summer we put out a online survey to understand some of the values of the community, and one of those is access and transport. So actually being able to get home is important. So although it's a state highway, we need NZTA to come in and have those discussions, because it's really important to the community to be able to get to the homes and where they work and things. Anything from you, Sian, on the progress we've made? There's the scoping report as well, which was a significant milestone that went to council kind of gave a bit more direction on the next stages of the project.
How many panel meetings have you had so far?
We've had one panel meeting, coastal panel meeting as an orientation meeting. So giving an introduction to people. We're thinking hard about how we need to bring iwi into that and make sure that they align in terms of both having the same level of understanding of the project, but the opportunity to interact and build those relationships, because it's quite a long process that we'll be embarking on.
Sean, did you want to make a comment?
I don't, not particularly. I think I can, if anyone wants to know more about what we've done to date, I'm happy to talk about that.
Talk about what?
What we've done today.
Any questions? Yeah.
So, can I just say that, just reiterate that we entered into this contract some time back, a couple of years ago, I suppose, is it?
April 2019, yeah.
Right, okay. So it's that's where catching up with the co-governance model has been a bit belated, so our apologies for that. But yeah, so we're getting there. But I haven't got any questions. Anybody else got any questions? No? Oh, Paul, sorry, you had?
It's really helpful just to bring those threads together. Just going back to some of the questions the Mayor was, or points the Mayor was taking in respect to the different parts of the sort of terrestrial and going into the wet area. What's the sort of outcome that might, and recognising there's a lot of work and talking to go through here, some of the outcomes that might result from this program?
So, firstly, considering we will have a better understanding of what the hazards are. It will be more robust and defendable. That is likely to translate or need to be considered as part of district plan.
Just pausing there, for sort of definitions of it, as it were. When you say natural hazards, what are we talking about?
Coastal inundation and.
Can you give an example? Not need to give an example.
An example would be the Thames coast and the fact that some of those communities are on alluvial fans and they're vulnerable to movement. So understanding where they're vulnerable, we will improve that understanding through this project. Importantly, that's not the end though. Understanding the hazards and potentially going through to a district plan isn't what the project's primarily about. It's about understanding what options the community want to take in response to that hazard. So there could be proposals to protect areas, or there could be proposals to accept the hazard and live with it. So those are some of the outcomes.
Just pause.
Can I? I'll give you an example. So take Te Puru. If we say that the sea level's risen by about 1/4 of an inch, but when you get a dynamic weather pattern and you have the inundation of the coast, and of course when the Thames Coast Road was completely tossed, there was the lower part of Te Puru was flooded. The houses were flooded, things were floating around inside, downstairs, things like that. So the community had been flooded a number of times. There can't be anybody that goes and buys in there and doesn't realise that they're taking a bit of a risk. So knowing that there's potential risk from the sea, inundation, flooding of properties, the community will say, okay, right, we've had enough of this now. So what are our choices? So they can either do a managed retreat, and the houses will slowly get sold off the front, or get retired, people get relocated somewhere else, or they can put the houses up on stilts like they do in Florida, or they can, what's the other one, decide that they want to have a block wall like they've just put down on the west coast. You know, so So first of all, they have to decide what's their trigger point. What is the trigger when they fire the gun and say, right, this is where we want to go now? Or then the other part is, do we want to manage retreat? Do we want a wall? They have to have a trigger point. And then of course, in the debate comes about who's going to pay and where do we go if it's managed retreat. If it's hard protection, what are we doing? What sort of hard protection, what form is that going to take? If it's just lifting up houses, who pays again, but it can be a viable option. Some people have done that already. And then just allow, then it just means their basements are flooded. So that's what it's about. It's saying, this is the hazard. When do you want us to pull the trigger? And when we pull the trigger, which of the options do you want to take?
So I hope that analysis is helpful and sort of does pick up the sort of options. So just going back to, I think, where you were going on for the analysis, so information is key. And that can be manifested in different ways. I don't know if, mapping and all that stuff is going to be an important tool and objective here as part of that improvement information. And we're just tending in terms of where the levels sit versus climate change and all that sort of thing. And so you refer to district plans and it picks up the trigger point from the media. Again, just knowing we're on the cliche journey as a destination, and this is probably as much for the council, so the politicians for this, for the management. Improved information, community discussions, for example, is a management trigger. It would not be an unusual response from a community saying, well, we're here, we've been here for a long time. We would like harder solutions here in terms of coastal limits and like. The things that cost money, etc. So where are these things in terms of what's proposed and what's processed? Where are these things going to go? Like reach a point, for example, where there are a number of discussions. There is the potential for this to be reflected in the statutory plans, district plans, and the like. And some examples around the country of how that's done. Management treatment on one side of the spectrum and expense of coastal woods on the other. Communities having their say, where does it all land? I know that's a hard question to answer, it's sort of part of the process. But it'd be quite good to go into this early to know the sorts of questions and outcomes that you might look at.
That's exactly what the coastal towns are designed to do when they have those discussions. They pull out those about what they value and then what the forms of protection are, or whether it's managed retrieval or protection of some form. That's what they're doing at making those sorts of considered responses at a local level. And then it'll, whatever they come up with will come up to this forum. The crunch will come when they have to look at what the dollars are. And so that'll be one of the key determinants of which direction to take, I would suggest. But then, sorry, Kieran.
Yeah, question two, just listen to the discussion. I'm halfway through reading the new NBA Act, which is basically RMA talking about. And there comes along a strong message about how urban development and rural development should work and what are the trigger points for that and what kind of resources come. But they talk about spatial planning being a big part of that. So if the community is going to grow and we need to expand and look after that part of the thing. And the question I've got is where does government fit in this as well? There must be a story for them to tell us if we're going to move this way and how they can support us. Is there any discussion around that?
Definitely a recognition that there will be, it's a changing landscape. There's policies and changes in the RMA and adaptation guidance that will come out probably as we're journeying through this project. So we have to be all over that, just like you've read half of it, we need to read all of it and understand what that means to the project. But also it's not just short term, it's a long term project as well. It's where we're heading in the long term, which will help, if we know where we're heading long term, will help some of the decisions earlier on. But yeah, there's a long long time frame that we're looking at. It's 100 years.
Is it 100 years of event or 100 years?
For 100 years, so that's for the next 100 years, yeah.
And you're building the resilience around a 100-year event?
There'll be different scenarios we look at, and we'll be considering what's acceptable risk to people as well. So we'll look at 100-year scenarios, and we'll look at how things are going to look in 100 years as well.
Tony?
One that two races is a good one, because I've been to many meetings in my own, and almost unanimously there is no appetite to do nothing, and the concept of managed retreat not seen as an option either, and protection is seen as an option, but no one knows how much they'll pay. And so the government, so what's happening as I see it, a lot of people like us are in the space at the moment, and I'm pretty certain they'll all come up with the same issues. And like many things, central government needs to skin in the game. They need to tell us what are they prepared to do, given we're talking about what will the sea level be in 100 years' time. And if that's right, it's raised 1.8 metres. And if that's right, then Thames is underwater, and a large part of Woody Agnew is underwater, and a large number of other coastal communities are underwater. So for me, the government, I think they need to be directed more to tell us what are they prepared to do. Because otherwise we're all going to sit here and the answer's going to come up, I think, coastal protection. And the coastal protection, we know, is going to cost you over $1 million for every 100 kilometres. 100 metres rather, that you protect, and that will be unaffordable for any communities. So there has to be more direction from central government, and there should be, in my mind, there should be significantly more pressure put on central government by pushback to say, we are squandering a lot of time having a court case about this, but what are you proposing for us, and what help is central government going to do? Because Thames-Coromandel district with 30,000 people cannot afford to protect their coast. If that's what it comes down to.
Oh, sorry. If you like. It's
an important discussion. It's not the first time it's been had. So again, it's coming back to the laudable intention and proposal with the process and where it might go to. I think what it does is really emphasise, which is hardly any new observation, that expectation management is very important. The very points that's been made, you know, who wants to have managed retreat in an area that's they've lived for generations? Obviously, I can't speak for people, but as a human response, that's really a natural one. And so it all ends up, you know, we spend a couple of years of our lives on a worthwhile project to be told, we've improved our information, someone needs to find a solution here, whether it's local or central government, and no further ahead. Then you wouldn't want people being negative in terms of when that's taken into, and you know, potentially have, and again, it's all crystal ball gazing, but you know, the regional council 5 years on, so well, this information is going to break things too much. These 5 communities are unsustainable, you're going to start moving. And we'll start changing the regional policy documents to do that. Yeah, that's a silly example. You know, there's a lot of moving parts to this, and we're really integral to how our communities feel and live within these areas. You know, clearly young people.
I think
it's actually a very valid point, because the discussion they're having at the regional council right now is about doing away with flood protection schemes. Well, that's not very helpful for people that are have an incredible amount of livelihoods on the Hauraki Plains, which are who are heavily invested in flood protection schemes. So, yeah, it's. I'd hate to. Thinking.
So I'm not trying to be negative or raise problems. It's just, you know, these are important communications with the project and all that are a part of it.
Yeah, definitely pick up the point about expectation management, and I think what the project does is allow you to look across the district and not look at one community group, because by itself, it may seem affordable and you build something to protect it, but you take a step back and you've got 20 or 50 of these areas, and some are more important than others. So this will help to determine some of where we should be prioritising some of that work. So with limited resources, financial ability, that prioritisation will be really, really important.
So I don't know, I mean, how relevant it is, but just when that conversation was happening about retreat management and stuff like that, I know some work I'm doing with having district council in Kiowa, that's always that kind of language there about not letting much more happen down the lakes and pushing everybody up the top. And then it's sort of, I'm just thinking that conversation there, triggering my mind, well, what actually happens over there has potential to, like on that shoreline, has potential to affect this shoreline because of the nature of the geography. And I guess my question would be along the way, are we going to factor that in terms of our thinking around, just not putting ourselves in the silo, which, biologically is not appropriate, because what's happening with the tick up in Moana from around the Flats here to Waitakaruru over to Kiowa, that side, are there effects from there that are coming over here and affecting the shoreline? So I'm not trying to expand the project or anything, but I'm thinking of being a bit short-sighted not to have that in our thinking along the way, and whether that's getting paid for district council to do some work of their own and collaborating around that sort of supply stuff. But us not thinking about it, I think is half thinking.
Well, can I just throw something in here then? So something is having an impact on our shoreline, regardless of where it's from, it will still create a trigger point for action. And that's what the key thing here is, to identify what those trigger points for action are. So, and so it takes all that into account, really. Oh, sorry, I just broke in. Oh, Sean, so Robert, then Sean.
And my thinking about this, I've spent a lot of time thinking about sort of the rise of change, and the value I see in this project is that we have an opportunity now to think about what our communities want, for our communities to tell us what they want and how, and to get a real understanding of all of the things that are in play, because then it doesn't matter if 5 years down the track, government says we're going to pay for everything. You don't have to start the process again to go, right, somebody's going to pay. What do we want them to pay for? So that's where I see a lot of value in this. Because when you look at all the things that you're talking about, Sandra, shifting up houses, raising them is going to cost money, building a wall is going to cost money, managing retreats is going to cost money. It's going to cost us. But then there's going to be cost involved. So what that cost is and who pays is almost irrelevant at this point, because we don't even know what it is that we want. So that's where I see the strength of this project.
And this is, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is, when we first started this, we were somewhat ahead of the game, but now it's almost an expectation from government that we do something along these lines. Is it the case?
Yeah.
From my perspective, sorry, I mean, I don't interrupt your meeting, but.
Well, I want you
Yes, from my perspective, every local authority that has a coastal environment should be doing a similar project to this, to get their ducks lined up, because every local authority with a coastal environment needs to be talking to their zone representatives and their local government New Zealand representatives. And every iwi member involved in this type of project should be talking to their OHA and their representatives and their leaders in terms of trying to encourage a joined-up New Zealand discussion. Because regardless of what decisions are made around this table, they're not going to be meaningful decisions unless we have a whole of New Zealand approach to the solutions, which is why this is our project that is going to be the next 10 to 15 years in the making, but it has to start being a giant joined-up type of project now. So the point about hierarchy is absolutely bang on. If we can't even join this project up with what hierarchy are looking at this point in time, then we're missing the opportunity to actually approach local government, New Zealand, the EV leaders, whatever conduit we use to continually elevate the knowledge that we gain and the community's responses to the knowledge that we gain. If we're not elevating that in the right way, we miss the opportunity. The sooner we can start elevating that and create those conduits and have them as real conduits with real decision making possibly to occur, the minute we lose that opportunity, we're going to get sideswiped by the insurance council or the private sector, who are going to actually place demands on local government to actually make decisions that we're not even prepared to make because we haven't had the right conversation. So this is a far bigger project than most people realise at this point in time, but the communities right around New Zealand are crying out for this project, which is what makes it so important. It's crawling before we can walk, but the important element of this is being joined up so that we can actually continually elevate and continually receive the feedback from that elevated information to just check that we're not wasting our time. That's the way I view this type of project.
Sharon?
Thank you. I just wanted, that's a really useful discussion. I think all the points that have been made are really valid. And it will be an important part of this project to manage expectations. But I think we also have to face the reality of these changes, of these challenges. There's all sorts of conflicts in terms of who will pay and what different people will want. And one of the things that came out of the values survey we did over last Christmas was that people value most highly in the Coromandel the natural characteristics of the coast and its wild, unspoilt nature and access to beaches. And so we need to talk to people about the fact that if we defend everywhere, not that we ever could because it would be unaffordable, we'll lose all of our beaches. So we need people at least to begin to think about those things and the choices that they're making. They might say they want a defence, but then they need to recognise they'll lose that opportunity to have access to the coast. Another comment I had was that the government is actually developing a managed retreat policy, apparently, which will be very interesting because they, as you said, they need to step up in terms of indicating to local authorities how this may or may not be funded or supported. So that's something that TCDC, we need to keep putting pressure on the government to do. In terms of Wharikawa Coast, the work that's being done there, we are maintaining a watching brief of that. And so we are looking at what they're doing and the decisions they're making so that we can ensure that, in as far as we can, there's some consistency between the approaches there. And for example, I've been provided with the risk assessment that they've done, which I'm going to look at and see how that fits with our expectations of our risk assessment. And I think it's been mentioned now, but we are connecting with WRC. So in terms of their regional plan updates, we want to inform those. We want to ensure that what we come up with is adopted in those plans so you don't end up with a sort of conflict of interest. But those are big hurdles to jump as part of this process. That was it.
Thank you, Sean. And just to add to that, if the government can, they will ensure that the local government sector carries the can for everything they can. Just saying.
It's interesting that the government gave us this figure of 1.8 metres. So they said this is what you must build or resistance to. If it was 0.8 of a metre, our plan would be completely different. So it's a big ask to work at 1.8 metres, and hopefully in 100 years it either gets there or doesn't get there. We don't know which way to go in terms of what to see what happens. But it is they told us what to do.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, but having said that, we're not just planning for 1.8 metres. We're going to plan with the communities for 0.5 metre and for 1 metre and all the way up to 1.8 metres. so that we also know what we're going to do once a 1/2 metre sea level rise occurs, if we need to respond at all in that time frame. Because we may not reach 1.8 metres, and therefore we might not need to respond to that. So there'll be this process of how we respond over time to as sea level rises or as the coastal change, if that happens.
Okay, any other? Paul, have you got any further questions? Anybody else got any further questions? Rob, did you want to add anything? Hang on.
So just to finish off, I suppose we've got a list of coastal panel workshops which we're proposing. We've had the panel orientation. So if you see on the accounts there, what's happening, panel orientation, the coastal hazards. We're going to have site visits in 2 weeks. That's the plan. We're looking at a values meeting afterwards. So there's a whole series of 10 different workshops that the coastal panels will be involved with, and that will go through until about this time next year. So those coastal panels are really important to look at it a little bit spatially or in a timeline way. The next kind of coastal panel meeting is here at Blue. But shortly after that, the next thing that we're going to have to think about is how we're going to start getting new hazard information in. So the preliminary flood inundation modeling's been done, the coastal erosion's been done, it's currently being peer reviewed. At the end of the year, or potentially in November, we could or should meet again to decide what we do and how understand what that hazard information is showing us before we go back out to the coastal panels and the public. So there's probably quite a few words, but two key points there. The coastal panels are really important. We want to make sure we continue with them, but we also want to try and get iwi on board. So that's one point there. And the second point is the hazard information is going to come quite soon, and we think that will come back to this group via a workshop before it goes to the next stages.
Right, so when did you say that was going to be?
Potentially the 12th of November is what was...
Next year?
No, the hazard information will be next month. So that's what was in the committee calendar. It's probably earlier than we would like in terms of having the information ready, but the end of November is probably an appropriate time for us to be sharing some of that hazard information.
Right, okay.
So just on those road trip we've got at the end of the month, one clashes with the meeting, isn't it?
Yes, there is one that clashes the Coromandel one, I think.
First one.
So what are the decisions that you'd be wanting from the hazard information from this committee?
We'd just like to get a level of comfort that this is how we're going to be presenting it to the community. So I mean, we can't change what it tells us, but we can have some awareness of what's there, understand that it's not the final outcome, so it's part of the process, and understand how we manage it in terms of it's not final until we understand our responses.
Let's see the information first, then we'll make a decision whether we have a meeting or not.
Okay.
Just a question around the coastal panels. There's 4 of them, so what's their interrelationship with each other, the communications? Do they communicate with each other, or are they all silos?
Silos, really?
Yeah,
The reason I ask that is from a iwi perspective is that there'll be a number of times where one iwi is in different parts, so it could be in all 4. But rather than being on all 4, is there an ability for them to, that say, to be able to communicate via they choose one panel be able to share or work alongside the other panels, not try and influence or anything or become a formal party to in terms of the leadership of it, but I think there needs to be some type of ability for that to happen, and there was probably a duplication by a representation. But I just wanted to ask about whether that's off scope.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely can. There's one option in terms of there's the technical advisory group. So you could have it set up there in terms of the idea is that that's where you look across the areas to look for consistency.
That's one level, like one platform.
Yes.
Okay. And the coastal panels agreeing to that as well?
Yes. Yeah. Vice versa.
Okay.
So. So I think, yeah, so that is one way to achieve that a little bit. So that would go across all of the four panels.
Okay.
But interested in your other ideas.
What's the expectation around the numbers in the technical advisory group?
So we have left that a bit open at this stage. We wouldn't expect as many as there are in the coastal panels, and we're unsure how much involvement, or we know that we want NZTA in there because it's a big influence, but we don't know the full extent of NZTA or Ministry of Education. So that's can be guided by this committee as well, that technical advisory group.
Why the Ministry of Education? Just because of Te Puru School and Tapu School?
Those would be two, yes.
So when the box is putting out key stakeholders, who's that? Is that the iwi themselves, or is there other parties to that?
Oh, so the key stakeholders is yeah, that is the
key stakeholders.
So that would be the NZTA, or it might be DOC.
I think it's not asking who the key stakeholders are.
NZTA and DOC, did you say?
Yep, more than likely DOC will feature somewhere along the way.
Is there an issue of having like priority as a box and key stakeholders?
No issue at all.
That'd be nice. Otherwise I'd say TCDC and key stakeholders. Or WRC and key stakeholders. But I try, the recognition of us as a treaty partner, who we are, and that sort of thing, I think is important, and acknowledging that there are other key stakeholders.
Yep, that's cool.
Yep.
What's the indications from what we're saying at the moment as to how they see this project in the legislation?
Sorry.
NZTA.
It's linking in really well to their.
How are they seeing what they're saying?
It's really important we want to be right in there. Simply, it aligns to the work they're already doing around resilience. That there's some parts of it they want to use us as a case study. We're more advanced, so they want to use the Thames Coast as a consultation case study. So they're keen, I suppose, is the one word if I had to choose one. Also, different elements of NZTA in terms of the regional and the central. So we've been directed and we've been picked up more at the national level than the regional level.
That's largely because of the Thames coastline. And I've been socialising the need for when they when they need to do any works on existing state highway, reclamation should be part of the community activities, maintenance and upgrades for existing state highways, so that they don't have to go and take more time and more money to do a resource consent just to crimp another half metre on the side of the road so that they can slope out a rock revetment wall to stabilise the seaward side of the road.
Potential question of where it is and what it is.
Okay.
Potential question of what it is and where it is in terms of reclamation.
Well, for a state highway, it's always only the rock remnant wall on the seaward side. Pretty much.
So there are some sensitive areas out there. So.
Ah, okay. Well, does Wakatane not directly?
Well, that's also clear.
Yeah. And so.
All I'm saying is if they had a limited activity, they wouldn't have to talk. So there's been no guarantee.
Unless it's a condition, yeah, for the permitted activity status.
So he would be saying.
And so that would.
The urgency of getting work done, just trying to balance that with the regime and keep that control.
Well, I think your involvement would be enhanced, I would suggest, with a permitted activity that set of criteria.
Criteria.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we could socialise that as part of this process, particularly for expediting works on that Thames-Coromandel Road, or just coastal state highway works within the wider to Tara-Otafi area. I just wanted to say that encompass the wholeness of it, if you like. Yeah.
So that,
No, I'm not just here as an observer, but initially you were talking about not necessarily looking at every centimetre of the coastline, talking about where there's council infrastructure and buildings, etc. But you've also just raised that interesting point is that there's obviously places on that coastline that haven't got any of that, but are very, very important to iwi. So I'm assuming that sort of fact will be factored into the coastal plan.
Yes, yeah, that's exactly what we need to learn more about.
So, and you took that isolated uninhabited areas that like the Tongan or areas of Waitakere. Yeah. So you want, okay. So you often don't want those recorded or identified.
Yes.
And so they become a different protection. That becomes a direct conversation of protection rather than through this process of.
Well, it could be a bridge to it.
Yeah.
It could be a bridge to that in the sense of what are the relevant measures to address the various exigencies for the community. So clearly a functioning road is important for the coast. What are the means to achieve that? So where we have the super tide, etc., and that causes damage, getting those repaired urgently is important. So too, we don't want to wait until the moon part is great. So how do we bring those things together to make sure we have the right outcomes?
You just have to tell us where they are and what the damage is and what the triggers are for getting protection, if not.
Well, coming back to your point is rather than moving to a full sort of wanting activity to do that, which would require no conversation, that there are criteria. And so if a new area of reclamation is going to occur, then they need to spend some money to make sure that would then protect the sensitivity of those areas and they don't have to go to public record, which is not a problem. So there are ways of achieving.
Yeah. But you just said then though, if it wasn't the permitted activity status, you don't.
So permitted activity without anything else would be a problem. But
no, it has to have the conditions. Yeah. So we could socialise that with Wakatane around our district roads, and maybe they want to think about.
So the question I want to ask about that transport strategy stuff we were doing the other day.
Yeah.
Does that link into this? We'd like as a tool for.
It's not really.
We could use it.
But we
The resilience issues of immigration.
We could though, in the transport plan, as a side issue for between, particularly if we incorporate Tauraki and Thames-Coromandel district. Is that state highway going through to Kaiara? Eh?
I just said it sounds like a unitary authority.
But
Out there or something.
I think, Rob was right to pick up on how it would work better
And so we need to maybe think about that. Tony, could that not go as a sidebar in our collective, with the other councils, and include the Parehariki collective contribution for our regional land transport plan?
Anyway, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
No, seriously, because Tony's our spokesperson.
I'd say it's,
I don't think it's good. I think we could do
it needs
that.
discussion, because a lot of it, what it's not focused on those issues. Nobody focuses.
But I think flag it
You know,
in the plan.
it's been flagged for Thames-Coromandel district from a infrastructure and community resilience. So for the roading network and stuff that lies under it, and then the communities themselves, what are we going to protect them? Because the roads out, the isolated communities that can't get to hospital.
That part, but the part that hasn't is the how to streamline the process to save time and money, but and improve the partnership approach.
I agree.
And the protection of wildlife. So just, okay, that was really clever. Yeah, that was valuable. Yes. And so outside of the roading network though, there are other areas on the coastline that no one knows about. And that, one actually, just at the beginning of the Code People Road there, the quirkies coming down. Okay.
Well, can I ask you, because when we're talking about the hazards, presumably, even though we're talking about hazards that are happening over an extended period of time as opposed to natural disasters, emergencies, that kind of thing, when Tony just talked about resilience and having communities road being out and off, do we, presumably in the technical working group, we can get our civil defence team, the emergency management people,
Yeah.
because they must have a perspective on what we do if there is a hazard.
Yep, our civil defence will be involved through that. Yeah.
Okay, well, is there anything else to be raised? I'll move that all of the 3 tranches of information be received, because I think that's the only resolution, isn't it? Is to move the information be received from these 3 different parts. Right, second that? Second, Robin, thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. Yes, carried. I think that's pretty well. Are there any other matters that anyone wants to raise? No? Terry?
I'll just talk to Damon about these meetings. We've done a meeting prior to the trip meetings, 2 days prior, called the actual meetings. What are they for? Like we have these days that we're going to go out and about, and then we've got these days coming up to like on the 24th. Hazards and adaptation menu.
That's not soon. That should be down the track a little bit.
Yeah, so this one here is the trip.
Yeah.
And this one's later on.
That's no big thing.
Okay. So obviously 27's out from there, but we can walk into the other ones. Just got to let you know. Or?
Yeah, through Monique.
Permanently.
Yeah, she would have said that.
Oh, sorry, I think the meeting closed. Sorry, Sean, thank you.
Sorry, I did have a point. Is that all right? Okay.
What's that?
She wanted to say something.
Oh,
Yeah. Sorry, what it is it's the point that's being made about values and the different values associated with the coast is quite important in terms of the programme, because we have planned to have the site visits at the end of October, and then after those meetings to have a session on values and the assets of value, which needs to include things like urupau or tapu sites, etc. And so for that reason, it's important that we have iwi representation on those site visits. Or if we can't have that, if that's not going to be achievable in the timescale, that we would need to move that values and objectives meeting to November and have the site visit in October, yes, but talk about values and objectives in November when we have those reps.
Can we, Charlene, iwi may want to have some of those discussions confidentially.
Yeah.
And keep information confidential with council in terms of sites that are wahi tapu or of special whānga to iwi. So I think it's really important that you still have all of those meetings and whatever you've got planned on your program, but we make extra provision for iwi to have those discussions.
Okay, good. Sorry if you said that, I missed that, but that's great. That works.
Well, I'm being presumptuous here.
No, right, but you're right. But also, people who go on the panels or go site visits might not necessarily have all the expertise in terms of locations of sites.
That's right.
So the information, digital, whatever, can be handed back, and then whoever possesses that knowledge can then apply whatever flags or indicators or criteria.
Yeah. So I think we'll be guided by the co-chairs on this one and work it through separately.
Okay. Thank you.
We'll keep it fluid. Keep it fluid. I don't think there's anything else to be raised. So just thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate you taking the time, particularly for David and Paul, because they've got a huge work program, and I really appreciate it being able to be here today because I know how difficult it is. So thank you very much to you both. Really much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Kia ora. And just to, as we said at the beginning, recognise the importance of this start, and time will go quickly, very important conversations and part of the ongoing relationship. So again, appreciate all the hard work that's been done here, and looking forward to the process. So if that's it, I'll close this up.
That's very great. Thank you.
Pena tātou, kia tau, whātai kia reiti, ki aroa tātua, te tika te wairo tapu, ake.
That means that Tony the South Plus